Good morning. Today I'm joined by Chris Wray, the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. Chris, thank you for being here. Patrick Fitzgerald, who's the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. And Don Van Dyne, Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI. Don, thank you for coming. Earlier this morning, an indictment by a federal grand jury in Chicago was unsealed. 3 men who allegedly ran a U.S.-based terrorist recruiting and financing cell associated with foreign terrorist organization Hamas were indicted for their roles in a 15-year racketing conspiracy in the United States and abroad. This cell allegedly financed the activities of a terrorist organization that was murdering innocent victims abroad, including American citizens. Mohammad Salah of suburban Chicago, Abdel Haleem, Ashqar of suburban Washington, D.C., were arrested last night. An arrest warrant was issued for the third defendant, Mousa Abu Marzook, who formerly lived in Louisiana and Northern Virginia and who now resides in Damascus, Syria. And Marzook will be considered a fugitive from justice. All 3 are charged with racketeering conspiracy for allegedly conducting, with named and unnamed co-conspirators, the affairs of Hamas. Hamas has been designated a foreign terrorist organization by the State Department, designated since 1997. The racketeering acts that Hamas enterprise allegedly agreed to commit include multiple solicitations of first-degree murder, conspiracy to kill, kidnap, maim, and injure persons in a foreign country, material support of terrorism, hostage-taking, and money laundering. Defendant Salah is also charged with providing material support, including money and personnel, to a terrorist organization. According to the indictment, in 1999, Salah directed and financed the travel of a Chicago-based associate to scout potential terrorist targets in Israel. Defendants Salah and Ashqar are also charged with obstruction of justice. Salah is alleged to have provided sworn answers that he knew to be false in a civil suit involving the murder of an American in the West Bank. It is alleged that in February 1998 in New York and again in June 2003 in Chicago, Ashqar, in an effort to hide his and co-conspirators Hamas's activities, refused to testify before a grand jury despite a grant of immunity. This indictment also seeks forfeiture of approximately $2.7 million from accounts in the defendant's control. Now, I want to note, as I always do, that an indictment contains only charges, and the indictment itself is not evidence of guilt. The defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty. I would also note that this indictment is not a reflection on the well-meaning people who practice the Muslim faith. This is an indictment of individuals for acts that are specified in the indictment. Throughout the 1990s, Hamas members publicly claimed credit for multiple terrorist attacks that resulted in the death of numerous civilians and military personnel in Israel. Just a few of the attacks that are cited in the indictment for which Hamas took credit are as follows: an April 1994 car bombing in Israel killing 8 Israelis, a February 1996 suicide bombing in Jerusalem that killed 24 Israelis and 2 Americans, a May 1996 drive-by shooting at students in the West Bank in which American student David Boehm was killed, and 2 suicide bombings in July 1997 in Jerusalem that killed 16 Israelis. According to the indictment, between 1989 and January 1993, Salah traveled throughout the United States, Israel, and the West Bank, meeting with Hamas representatives. During these travels, he is alleged to have recruited and trained new members of Hamas and distributed hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to support Hamas members and activities. In September 1992, for example, the indictment alleges that Salah traveled to the West Bank, where he met with Hamas leaders. There, Salah was allegedly informed that Hamas had approximately 53 recruits prepared to carry out terrorist attacks, but that funding was needed to assist them. The indictment alleges that Salah agreed to pass on the request for money to Marzook and others. It is also alleged that on this trip, Salah provided money for the purchase of weapons by writing 10 checks, each for $5,000, from one of his Chicago bank accounts. He then cashed those checks in Israel. In the following 3 months, Hamas members publicly claimed credit for 8 different terrorist attacks that resulted in the deaths of numerous Israeli civilians and military personnel. Defendant Marzook is alleged to be the deputy chief of Hamas Political Bureau, which functions as the leadership body for Hamas, including coordinating terrorist attacks by Hamas. From 1988 until February 1993, while living in America, Marzook allegedly coordinated and financed the activities of Hamas within the United States and elsewhere. The indictment alleges that during this time, Marzook also maintained numerous bank accounts in such places as Ohio, Wisconsin, New York, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Virginia. To aid Hamas, substantial sums of money, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, were allegedly transferred in and out of these accounts, as well as overseas accounts, for disbursements inside and outside the United States. Both Marzook and Salah have previously been designated as specially designated terrorists by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Control. Defendant Ashqar initially entered the United States as a graduate student at the University of Mississippi in Oxford. The indictment alleges that from 1989 on, Ashqar functioned as a conduit of money for Hamas and as an administrator for the terrorist network. He allegedly participated in Hamas meetings in the United States and in a number of phone conversations about Hamas's plans. Sometimes these calls were in code. The individuals named in this indictment are alleged to have played a substantial role in financing and supporting international terrorism. They are alleged to be material supporters of a foreign terrorist organization taking advantage of the freedoms of an open society to foster and finance acts of terror. The United States makes no distinction between those who carry out terrorist attacks and those who knowingly finance, manage, or supervise terrorist organizations. This case would have been much more difficult to bring were it not for information sharing authorized by the USA Patriot Act, information gathered by the intelligence community and now shared with law enforcement was critical in completing this investigation and bringing this indictment. I thank Assistant Attorney General Chris Wray. I also express my appreciation to US Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, and I commend the efforts of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Don, thank you for being here representing them. I commend their efforts in this case. I would be pleased to welcome your questions, yes.
What can you tell us about the efforts to apprehend Mr. Marzook? Do we believe he's in Syria, and what sort of arrest warrant's been issued?
We consider him and will consider him to be a fugitive, and we will take the steps that are available to us to have access to him and to bring him to justice in the United States.
Can you describe just who they dealt with here in the United States, where they were getting this money that they raised, and also what the total sums are that you believe they raised over this 15-year conspiracy?
The indictment contains a number of figures that relate to the scale of this situation, including our attempt and our effort to take possession of over $2 million currently. I will not go outside the limits of the indictment in attempting to define the scope of the effort. Yes, sir.
Good morning. I had two questions unrelated, if I might. I'm interested in Mexico and sort of in your assessment of where we stand so far as concerns of the U.S. government about the vulnerability that the country has to terrorists entering through Mexico. There have been some recent reports involving a woman who was picked up in McAllen. There's reports dealing with this fellow Shooter Juma that we're concerned about. And I'm interested in sort of, your assessment about the level of concern and vulnerability we have and what the U.S. is doing about that.
We obviously are very sensitive to the dangers that come from terrorists in any culture. And we know that those who came here to conduct the attacks on September the 11th, 2001, gained access to this culture in very conventional ways. So that, let me begin by saying that we believe that virtually every culture is susceptible to terrorists using the culture either as a base for operations or as a launching arena for others. We are working carefully with our counterparts in Mexico, and I have regular contact with them regarding ways in which we can work together to provide elevated levels of security both in Mexico and the United States so that we do not have terrorist attacks. Obviously, when we talk about North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, we share substantial borders. They are borders across which people come at very high levels of traffic flow. And so we work diligently to try and make sure that we do whatever we can to reduce the risks of terrorism in the North American arena, not just in the United States. Yeah.
General Ashcroft, the next major event in this country is the Republican National Convention. What is the degree of threat from terrorists to that convention specifically?
Well, we believe that we need to be alert as a nation against terrorist activities. And obviously we would take any specific plan for criminal activity against a political convention very seriously. We believe that the steps that are being taken to secure the convention are very good steps. The city of New York has an extraordinary focus to prevent and to be in a position to handle threats of terror, so that we take the general threat very seriously. I believe the first sort of substantial statement that the FBI director and I made about that was several months ago. We think the threat persists in the country, but steps that have been taken are very, very important for us to continue to carry out. And we don't believe that the convention in New York is in, let me just put it this way, I don't know of specific threats to disrupt the Convention of New York that are not being addressed completely and appropriately. Yes?
The charges against Mr. Ashqar, among the others, are very serious. Can you explain why he would have been offered a grant of immunity just a short time ago?
I'm not in a position to discuss the offers and the proceedings that were undertaken at that time. Yes.
Can you explain how long this investigation took, how long you've been working with these specific individuals and charges, and why it's so significant that the group's charged as a criminal enterprise with these racketeering charges?
Well, these are complex matters, but they are very serious matters. These involve the murder of innocent individuals, including innocent Americans, and a number of them. And they are transnational. They involve information from not only in the United States, but outside the United States. And so it's very, very important that, and sometimes difficult to assemble all the information. I might add that the ability to access intelligence information has been helpful to us in a number of cases and circumstances, and I'm not making a comment on evidence in any specific case, although I did indicate that it would have been difficult for us to have, well, that this case was facilitated by the access to information that we have with the Patriot Act, and by giving access to information which had previously not been considered available to criminal prosecutors, we've been able to bring a number of cases across the country. And after the enactment of the Patriot Act, I asked all of our prosecutors across the country to look carefully at files where they had inadequate levels of information under the prior regime and set of protocols, to look at those cases again with the access that's provided by the Patriot Act. And so whenever that additional capacity results in the reaching of a critical mass of evidence that would support an indictment, you can expect to see us moving forward, and that's an ongoing process. Yes.
Given the developments in this case and the shutting down of the Muslim charities, is Hamas still able to raise funds in this country for illegal purposes? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think what's important is that the Congress has made it illegal to provide any material support to designated foreign terrorist organizations. And that is even if the donor intended to fund benign activities. So that the law here is pretty clear, I should say very clear, that the Congress makes it illegal to provide material support to designated foreign terrorist organizations. And once there's a designated terrorism determination made, that makes providing funds to those organizations a very serious act. Yes.
Sir, could we know where the three men were originally from? And how far have the authorities been able to penetrate into these terrorism financing activities in the United States so far?
Well, none of these individuals was originally an American citizen to begin with.